Alright, well usually stuff like this is put in front of games and horror movies as a vehicle for hype. I gotta say this one is actually pretty intense. I'm gonna do the best I can to tastefully cover Cry of Fear, but be warned, the content of this game is not for the faint of heart. So while I was working on this video, I got a call out of the blue from my old boss saying that they were open again and not so subtly hinting that they'd really like it if I came back. Plot twist. An old coworker added me on LinkedIn and told me the same thing, and it's kind of obvious they're hurting real bad. Now, I ask myself, do I want to go back to a place where I was treated so poorly I legitimately consider crawling back to Domino's? Or do I want to keep doing this and making videos you guys enjoy? I think you already know the answer. It's always good to save money where you can, and there's no better way to save money than with free stuff. For those of you a little too young to remember the glory days of source mods, from just after the release of Half-Life 2, all the way up until the Unity engine took over as a de facto indie dev machine, Steam used to be a veritable smorgasbord of free games for all of us that were too young to really have an income to play, thanks to being an easy-to-access dev kit, and to make matters even better, the hosting was great on Steam, so we could all play the games together. Those were the days. Zombie Panic Source, Zombie Master, The Hidden, all great multiplayer experiences that could be pretty spooky in their own right. There was one Source game that stood above all the others as the spookiest, most hardcore of them all, which had a full-blown story campaign, custom maps, tons of secrets and replayability, and on top of it all, if you were too much of a chicken to play it by yourself, they had a full-blown co-op mode too, complete with its own designated story. If you don't know what I'm talking about already, this is Team Psych Scholar's Cry of Fear, the mother of all source mod horror games, with scenes and enemies so graphic that it can make Outlast look tame at times. Cry of Fear is made by the modder group Team Psych Scholar, which currently consists of 4 dudes in Scandinavia. 2 voice actors / playtesters who go by Dragonor and Berserk89, Dev Minute, and lead dev Rumpel, who had previously made the horror source mod Afraid of Monsters, not to be confused with the later iteration Afraid of Monsters DC, which was made by Team Psych Scholar. For Cry of Fear, they brought on some extra help to make the big push from ModDB Darling to a full standalone game with its own Steam page, a process which took about 4 years and had a few delays along the way. I gotta say, I remember hearing about this game around the time it had its full release, but I always thought the talk of how brutal and spooky it was just that. Talk. Nope. This is some high-grade nightmare fuel right here. From a gameplay perspective, Cry of Fear is about as survival horror as you can get. Ammo for weapons you find is scarce, and Simon isn't exactly whatever the Swedish equivalent of a Green Beret is. Even on normal difficulties, the most basic of enemies don't go down without a good fight, and you're eventually just gonna have to try and run past groups of them unless you're cheating ammo into the game or something like the loser you are. Some guns have more ammo available than others, especially after some of the whatever these things are decide that they're done with wielding hammers, chainsaws, and blades and just get some guns. At least it makes for a steady stream of Glock ammo though. Where things get interesting is that Simon is able to use 2 one-handed items at once, including dual-wielding pistols. What you're likely going to be doing is having your pistol in one hand and your phone's flashlight on in the other so you can get an idea of what you're shooting at. There's multiple catches though. Not only are you a lot less accurate when holding your weapon in one hand, but you also won't be able to bop the monsters on their stupid head with your gun once you're out of ammo, or even so much as reload your pistol once it's out because you need 2 hands to eject the magazine. There might be a solution to your lack of pointable light when you're two-handing your gun somewhere in the game, but I'll let you guys find it for yourself. And of course, it wouldn't be a proper survival horror game without some puzzling to do, the first of which is your inventory management. Originally you got 12 slots, but Rumpel, being the madman that he is, lowered it down to 6, and it might even get lower later in the game. Lucky for you, extra ammo doesn't take up a slot. Unlucky for you, key items take up slots. Weapons won't despawn if you drop them, however, so if you need to put something down to pick up a key item, you can go unlock the door and get it back. However, you might have a bit of trouble because sometimes they're hard to spot against certain textures, which I found out the hard way when I was doing that little treasure hunt in the park. Cry of Fear also has a lot of traditional puzzles too. The devs say they took inspiration from the Resident Evil series, particularly 2, and that's down to having Leon Kennedy's signature sidearm being a weapon you can find in mid-game. Most of the puzzles are as simple as go find this thing and go back to this place so that you can advance, but there's a lot of good old-fashioned, what the heck is this supposed to be crap going on in there too. Makes for a nice change of pace. Most of these puzzles serve as a vehicle to put you in more situations to get the crap thoroughly scared out of you yet again. Most important of all during your rationing of bullets and figuring out what the heck you're supposed to do at that other park is the constant theme that you are never safe. If you are not being jumped on by something that would be pushing Hellraiser standards of freaky, you are seconds away from something jumping out from around the corner or literally out of thin air. There's almost no downtime in-game, and most of the time you're in claustrophobic hallways with tons of offshoots leaving you double-checking everything because Christ, those Blade Girl things are terrifying when they get the jump on you. To put a big spooky cherry on top of all of this, Cry of Fear has a ton of replay value. There's 4 different endings in the single-player campaign, plus a 5th secret ending on top of the co-op campaign ending too, making 6 so far, not counting bonus stories. Then there's the custom campaigns, plus a bit of side stuff thrown in by the devs too, like a short, sweet side story where you play as the antagonist doctor, and if you can survive that, you might unlock the night vision gas mask he wears for the main campaign. There's a lot of unlockables such as alternate costumes, obscenely powerful weapons, and other stuff I'm not good enough to unlock on my own, but it'll keep you coming back if you're really into this game. This is a lot just for one game that was effectively made by 4 dudes, or let alone for a proper horror game studio period. Did I mention that this is free? Real quick before we get into the good spookies, let's give a little bit of love to our spooky sponsor for IndieWeen, Acheron. Acheron is a new grimpunk tabletop game inspired by the likes of Call of Cthulhu, Dishonored, and the SCP Foundation, taking place in a supernatural world where once upon a time there was a big magical wall protecting everyone from whatever was out there, but then someone went and broke it, so now it's adventuring time. You and your cadre of unique races can go on see what's leaked into the 60 different districts of Acheron and suffer from traumas of the physical, supernatural, and psychological variety. Don't worry though, if you're fond of your character, the Die Hard system makes sure that in the event of successive crit fails, you won't be going back to the character creations sheet, but instead, you'll survive with permanent debuffs such as missing limbs, a loss of senses, or crippling phobias. Stuff I know you're into based on how the Kenshi video did. If this sounds like your kind of thing, check out Acheron on Kickstarter and maybe show them some indie love. Now, where were we? Ah, right, crippling phobias. Cry of Fear does not mess around. If I had to describe Cry of Fear's style of horror, it'd be pretty grindhouse-esque. It's violent, enemies are gruesomely disfigured before you start beating them up, and the whole world looks like it's one giant haunted maze. Let's talk about those enemies in Cry of Fear. All of them are terrifying. First, you'll meet the relatively normal-looking dudes who try to bop you on the head with their hammers, and this would be fine, except for most of the early game you won't have a gun yet, so you're gonna have to get up close and personal with them. There's a dodge system in place, but it's very hard to master. You'll also need to save what little ammo you have for the fast enemies, like these little kitties that run at you with knives dressed up in trash bags that look as if they were dumped bodies or something. And just when you thought that was screwed up, you'll discover that these little abominations that might be the work of a serial killer living in your building, you'll get ambushed by the Girl Scouts from Hell, who have had their limbs replaced by big old blades and they scream really loud. They also impale themselves upon their death, making an even more unsettling scream. I don't know what it is, but after playing this at night a few times and going to sleep, I'd have the scream stuck in my head like you would a normal song. It was rather unpleasant. These are just the first, most basic enemies of the game. Then there's Fast Michael Myers, the bed dudes, the tongue boys, the zombies that decided to have friggin' guns, the really tall boys, and not to mention all the bosses that are their own freaky masterpieces in their own right. Next come the environments, which really push what you could do with the source engine with how dark and grungy they are. When the game isn't throwing monsters at you, there's an ominous vibe everywhere you go, and the few places that aren't looking like they're straight out of a slasher film give off the creepiest vibes of them because they have this weird feel because no one's around and it's just too sterile. And then of course it becomes dark and things jump out at you. There's tons of old, broken down, nasty areas where, as previously mentioned, there's all those offshoots and narrow passageways where the monsters will jump out at you, so the environment does indeed do a very good job of being a spooky thing in and of itself. And lastly, there's all the weird stuff that can't possibly be real, even if the doctor wearing a mask to avoid whatever is making these monsters is right. Early on in the game, you'll be given a sequence that's definitely more on the surreal side, and every now and again, you're going to be put in a situation where you know what's going on is not real. We'll get more into that unreliable narrator stuff and these hallucinations later in the story section, but it keeps you guessing as you get closer and closer to figuring out what that doctor guy is up to. Now, as far as all the monsters that jump out of you whenever there's a blind corner go, I don't know if I consider these jump scares, since Rather than be out of nowhere and capitalizing on a normally calm, quiet environment for surprise factor, they're going to jump out at you every chance they get, and you'll know this by the time you're about 10 minutes into the game, but that doesn't make it any less scary or surprising. The real scares come from going through every last hallway, being on edge, wondering what the heck is going to jump out at you this time. There's no surprise factor, there's just bracing for it in these big spooky buildings. The game does manage to find new and messed up ways to surprise you though as you go on. And how is that? By pulling exactly 0 punches with all the stuff you see here. Between the previously mentioned enemies that have some gruesome implications, and how Simon heals himself by going all splicer and jabbing random needles of what is allegedly morphine into his arm in full view of the game's camera, which also show off a few self-harm scars if you look closely, to the fact that the second time you run into the doctor, he's sawing off a dude's head because the guy mildly inconvenienced him, and then he feeds the key to the hallway to this giant monster that's immediately going to kill you. Speaking of that particular fight, the way you deal with some of the bosses in this game is pretty gnarly, but they do tend to make for some of the best boss battles I've ever played in a Source Engine game. I get the feeling that this had to have been a free game made by a small team because no developer studio or publisher would touch this. Even entities like Red Barrels who got their funding from a grant, there's only so much you can do if your money's coming from the government. At a certain point, even in the name of art, people are going to draw the line. So what the heck is going on in Cry of Fear anyway? Well, Simon wakes up in a random part of town with no collection of how he got there, and his mommy is texting him all like, "Hey, it's time to come home, sweetie." And Simon's a good boy, so he starts heading home. Everything seems a little off though in this unusually empty rendition of Stockholm, and then out of nowhere some dude tries to up and murder him to death. Good thing Simon had his pocket knife handy. After a bit, Simon discovers that the whole city has gone crazy and he's gotta fight his way out of this place if he wants to survive. Throughout the events of this big old nightmare, Simon keeps running into this guy wearing a doctor's coat and a gas mask. When asked about it, he says he's wearing it so he doesn't become one of them, whatever that means, and it's fairly obvious early on that this guy's an antagonist after we see him murder a dude for the crime of not giving him directions. The doctor straight up shoots Simon at a certain point, so it's safe to say this person does not have Simon's best interests in mind. Aside from a lady friend who appears very briefly mid-game, the doctor seems to be the only person sane enough to talk to during this entire romp through the city. Okay, spoiler time folks, you know what to do if you don't want them. So there are 4 endings to this game. 5 if you count the secret ending. The connecting threads between the 4 of them is that everything you experience is a byproduct of some poorly received cognitive therapy after Simon had a bad accident that left him paralyzed from the waist down. What went down was, on what Simon calls the Black Day, he confessed his love to that girl we met earlier in the story, Sophie, who spurns him, and Simon's mental state wasn't all that good to begin with, but on top of all that, things get worse. While trying to help out some dude laying in the middle of the street, Simon gets hit by a car and horribly injured in the accident. So now on top of some crippling physical injuries, Simon's at his mental breaking point too. He gets assigned to Dr. Purnell, a psychotherapist who helps him work through his traumas, and for a while he is very heavily medicated until Dr. Purnell decides that oodles of pills aren't going to solve anything. Dr. Purnell tells Simon that he should start writing a book to help him put his traumas to rest. This turns out to be a terrible idea, as somehow this book Simon writes becomes its own twisted version of reality with all the monsters in it representing Simon's traumas, including the doctor in the gas mask representing Dr. Purnell. In what people consider the good ending, quote unquote, Simon is able to realize what his twisted world is and is able to confront his actions through it. In this ending, you play as sick Simon, who is bound to his wheelchair and considered the real Simon, and you fight against the book Simon, a twisted version of himself that was created through the creation of the book and is also the person you've been playing as for most of the game, and in the other 3 endings you still play as him as you kill sick Simon. In the good ending, you don't succumb to your demons, but it turns out that you killed 2 cops in a psychotic episode who might or might not be the cops that you play as in co-op mode and are sentenced to life in prison. Lucky for you, the real Dr. Purnell testifies on your behalf about your mental health, and you're transferred to a mental facility where you finish your book, exercise your demons to some extent, get some better therapy, and even forge a proper friendship with Sophie. The end. Okay, so rather than phrase the question as, would I recommend playing this? I'm going to say that I would only not recommend this game if you have sensitivities to issues of mental trauma, self-harm, or just really get squeamish around some especially grotesque looking monsters. This game is not to be taken lightly based on its themes. Otherwise, there is no reason for you not to give this try, as it's extra spooky, has a ton of replay value between unlockables, alternate endings, and the co-op campaigns, and by the way, it's totally free. This makes the running total of all the IndieWeen games so far at either $20 if you didn't snag Close to the Sun for free last summer, since 20 plus 0 is still 20, or alternatively, you could still be sitting at 0 right now on top of that if you redeemed all those games over the summer. I think so far we are doing pretty well versus one $60 AAA title, thank you very much. Up next, we're going to do a small series of spooky 8-bit games that you can snag for less than $5 known as Faith, and after that we're graduating to 16-bit and adding a little bit of wackiness to our spookies. Speaking of things you can do for less than $5, you can help support this channel and in the process get early access to videos like this one, get special roles in the Discord channel, and allow me to cover the games I want to cover instead of idly going with the flow over at patreon.com/charlatanwonder. Special thanks to all my current $10 patrons at the time of recording this: Elisanera, Tor H, Richard H, Graham R, Spectate, The Shogun, Niles D, Yannick Z, Memesh, Schlingding, Jacob Maria, Dead Negator, Karlsky, Chili Moonbuns, OMG Ponies, Bam Bam Toxico, Shredded Paper Plate, Mick Fluffers, and French Toast. Thank you all so much. I'm just trying to get through these videos as best I can, and I'm just loving it right now. Thank you all so much for sticking with me. I know that big 2-month gap sucked. So in the meantime, please stay safe, stay indoors when you can, wash your hands and wear your mask when you go out, and enjoy this cat video.
So, we got the saucy boy a Halloween costume. He hates it. You gotta fix your dino spines. At least he's getting in the mood. All Predator-esque.
Yeah, he does not like it.
Saucy boy, what kind of a score do you give this Halloween costume? You don't like it? You want me to get you another one? Maybe one that's better? Look at this boy. Our feet are so getting attacked in the night. Scritchies? Oh wow, it doesn't even want the scritchies. Alright, that's enough.